A simple discovery. Rachel Morrison adjusted her reading glasses as she sorted through dusty boxes in the archives room of Whitmore Industries. The basement space smelled like old paper and forgotten memories. At 28, she had worked as a community outreach coordinator for 9 months, and this filing project was supposed to be simple. Just organize old newsletters and company announcements. Nothing exciting. But then she found it. Tucked inside a newsletter from 6 years ago was a brief article about the company's founding. One sentence caught her eye: James Whitmore celebrated his 36th birthday by announcing the opening of our 5th regional office. She did the math quickly. If he was 36 then, he would be 42 now. And his birthday would be November 15th. That was next week. Rachel sat back in her folding chair, thinking. She had only seen James Whitmore a handful of times since starting her job. He was the kind of CEO who appeared in quarterly meetings and then vanished back into his top-floor office. Tall, probably over 6 feet, with sandy brown hair that was starting to gray at the sides. He wore expensive suits that fit perfectly. His blue eyes seemed sharp and intelligent, but also tired. Really tired. Noticing the details. Over the next few days, Rachel found herself paying attention to things she had never noticed before. How James walked through the building like a ghost, present but not really there. How employees spoke about him with respect but no warmth. How he attended meetings with a notebook and pen, taking careful notes, but never smiled. Not once. She mentioned it to Nina, her best friend who worked in the design department. They were having lunch in the company cafeteria, sharing a plate of fries. "You ever notice how lonely Mr. Whitmore seems?" Rachel asked, dipping a fry in ketchup. Nina looked up from her salad. "Lonely? He's a billionaire. He probably has everything he wants." "Does he though?" Rachel stirred her iced tea thoughtfully. "I've been watching him. He eats lunch alone in his office every day. He leaves after everyone else. He never joins the company events or holiday parties. When was the last time you saw him actually talk to someone about something other than work?" Nina considered this. "Never, I guess. But maybe that's just how rich people are. They live in a different world." "Maybe," Rachel said. "Or maybe they get so focused on building their world that they forget to live in it." The decision. That evening, Rachel stood in her small apartment kitchen, looking at her grandmother's recipe book. The pages were stained and worn from years of use. She flipped to the lemon cake recipe, her grandmother's specialty. Every birthday when Rachel was growing up, there had been lemon cake with cream cheese frosting. Sweet, tangy, made with love. Her phone rang. It was her mother calling from Connecticut. "Hi, sweetheart. How's the city treating you?" "Good, Mom. I have a question. Do you remember how Grandma always said the best gifts come from the heart, not the store?" Her mother laughed. Of course. She believed homemade everything was better. Why? Rachel explained about discovering James Whitmore's birthday and her idea to bake him a cake. She expected her mother to say it was unprofessional or strange. Instead, there was a long pause. "Your grandmother would have loved that idea," her mother said finally. She always believed everyone deserved to be remembered. Rich or poor, famous or unknown. A birthday matters. But is it weird? I mean, he barely knows I exist. Rachel, honey, the world needs more people willing to do kind things without expecting anything back. If your instinct is to bake that man a cake, then bake it. The worst that happens is he thinks you're strange. The best that happens is you remind him he's human. Baking with purpose. Rachel spent Wednesday evening in her kitchen, measuring flour and sugar, zesting lemons, and whisking eggs. She thought about James Whitmore as she worked. What kind of life led someone to be so successful yet so isolated? What dreams had he given up? What losses had he experienced? The cake turned out perfectly. 3 layers of moist lemon cake with smooth cream cheese frosting. She decorated it simply with fresh lemon slices on top. Nothing fancy, but made with care. The card was harder. Rachel went through 5 drafts before settling on something simple. Happy birthday, Mr. Whitmore. Even the busiest people deserve to be remembered on their special day. I hope this brings a moment of sweetness to your year. She signed it simply, Rachel Morrison, Community Outreach. The delivery. Thursday morning arrived gray and cold. Rachel dressed carefully in a navy blazer and cream blouse, her dark curls pulled back in a neat ponytail. She carried the cake box like it held something precious, because it did. Not the cake itself, but the intention behind it. The executive floor was quiet and intimidating. Thick carpets muffled sound. The art on the walls probably cost more than Rachel's car. Everything whispered money and power. Patricia, James's executive assistant, looked up with surprise when Rachel approached her desk. Patricia was in her late 50s, with kind gray eyes and silver hair styled in a professional bob. "Can I help you, dear?" Rachel set the box down carefully. "I have something for Mr. Whitmore. It's personal, but not inappropriate. Today is his birthday." Patricia's eyebrows rose so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. "His birthday? How did you know that?" "I found it in an old company newsletter. I thought someone should acknowledge it." Rachel pushed the box forward. "Could you make sure he gets this? And please don't mention it came from me specifically. He probably doesn't even know who I am." Patricia lifted the lid slightly, seeing the homemade cake inside. Her expression softened completely. "Oh, honey. When did you make this?" "Last night. It's my grandmother's recipe." For a long moment, Patricia just looked at Rachel, then at the cake, then back at Rachel. "You know what? I've worked for James Whitmore for 12 years. This is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for him. I'll make sure he gets it right away." The response. Rachel hurried back to the elevator, her heart pounding. She had done it. Whether it was foolish or kind, she had done it. Now she just had to hope she hadn't made a terrible mistake. She spent the rest of the day trying to focus on work, updating donor databases and planning the community center's holiday toy drive. But her mind kept wandering to the 15th floor, wondering if James had received the cake yet, wondering what he thought. At 4:30, her computer chimed with a new email. The sender made her heart skip, j.whitmore@whitmoreindustries.com. "Ms. Morrison, thank you for the unexpected kindness. The cake is delicious, and the gesture is appreciated more than you know. I would like to invite you to our executive planning meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m., Conference Room A, 15th floor. We're discussing the Riverside Community Initiative, and I believe your perspective would be valuable. Best regards, James Whitmore." Rachel read the email 3 times. He knew it was her. Despite asking Patricia not to say anything, he knew. And instead of ignoring it or finding it strange, he had invited her to an executive meeting. Nina appeared at her desk, eyes wide. "Did you just get an email from James Whitmore himself? How did you know?" "Because you're staring at your computer like it just told you you won the lottery." "What did he say?" Rachel turned her screen so Nina could read it. Her friend's jaw dropped. "Rachel Morrison, what did you do?" Rachel smiled, thinking about a lemon cake cooling on a CEO's desk and a simple card that said everyone deserves to be remembered. "I think I just reminded someone that birthdays matter." What she didn't know yet was that her simple act of kindness had just changed everything. For James Whitmore, sitting alone in his office with a slice of homemade cake, the carefully constructed walls around his heart had just developed their first crack. And once a wall starts cracking, it's only a matter of time before the whole thing comes down. An unexpected morning. The rain came down in steady sheets that Friday morning, turning the city streets into rivers of reflected neon and headlights. Rachel stood in line at Morningside Coffee, her usual spot 4 blocks from the office. She had been coming here every workday for 9 months, finding comfort in the familiar routine. The cafe smelled like roasted beans and cinnamon, warm and inviting against the November chill. Behind the counter, Tommy, a college student with perpetually paint-stained fingers, smiled as she approached. "The usual, Rachel? Medium vanilla latte with that almond milk you like?" "Yes, please. And one of those cranberry scones. They smell amazing today." As Tommy prepared her order, Rachel checked her phone. No new messages. The executive meeting was still 5 hours away, and she was already nervous. What would she even say to a room full of senior executives? What did James Whitmore really want from her? Medium black coffee. Nothing added. Rachel's entire body went still. She knew that voice. Deep, measured, with a slight rasp that suggested too many late nights and not enough rest. She turned slowly. James Whitmore stood 3 feet behind her in line, looking completely different from the CEO she had glimpsed in hallways. He wore dark jeans, a charcoal sweater under a rain-dampened jacket, and his sandy brown hair was slightly messy from the weather. Without the armor of his business suits, he looked younger. More human. Their eyes met, and Rachel saw genuine surprise cross his features, followed by something that might have been pleasure. "Rachel. I didn't expect to see you here." Her name. He had said her name like he actually knew who she was. "Mr. Whitmore. I come here every morning. The coffee is better than the office break room. So I'm discovering." He stepped closer as the line moved forward. "I usually have coffee delivered to my office, but I had an early meeting downtown and decided to try something different. And you found what the rest of us already know. Real coffee comes from real coffee shops, not corporate catering." James smiled, and the expression transformed his entire face. "I'm learning that I've been missing quite a lot about the real world." Sharing a table. 10 minutes later, they sat at a corner table by the window, watching rain streak down the glass. Rachel had her latte and scone. James had his black coffee and, at her insistence, had ordered one of Tommy's famous blueberry muffins. "You should try it," Rachel said, breaking off a piece of her scone. "Tommy's grandmother taught him to bake. Everything here is made from scratch at 5 in the morning." James took a bite of the muffin, and Rachel watched his expression change from polite interest to genuine appreciation. "This is incredible. When did I stop eating food that tasted like someone actually cared about making it?" "Probably around the same time you stopped remembering your own birthday," Rachel said gently. James looked up at her, those tired blue eyes suddenly vulnerable. "Thank you for the cake. It was the kindest thing anyone has done for me in years. Maybe ever. Everyone deserves to be remembered on their birthday." "Do they?" James stirred his coffee absently. "Sometimes I think I've built such high walls around myself that I've forgotten how to let people in. How to be remembered for anything other than quarterly profits and business acquisitions." Rachel heard the loneliness in his voice, the same isolation she had noticed watching him move through the office. "What happened? You didn't start out wanting to be isolated, did you?" Stories of loss. James was quiet for a long moment, watching the rain. When he spoke, his voice was softer than before. "My mother died when I was 17. Car accident. Completely unexpected." "I'm so sorry," Rachel said, her heart aching for the boy he had been. "It changed everything. My father became obsessed with the family business, pouring all his grief into work. He taught me that success was the only thing that mattered. That emotional connections were weaknesses. That if you want to build something that lasts, you have to be willing to sacrifice everything else." James looked at her then, really looked at her. "So that's what I did. I built Whitmore Industries from a small regional company into what it is today. I worked 16-hour days. I skipped holidays and birthdays. I kept everyone at a distance because distance felt safer than disappointment. Rachel wrapped her hands around her warm latte cup. And now you have everything except the one thing that actually matters. Which is connection. People who know your favorite coffee order. Friends who remember your birthday. Someone to share blueberry muffins with on a rainy morning. James smiled sadly. You make it sound simple. It is simple. It's just not easy. Rachel paused, then decided to share her own story. My father died when I was 23. Heart attack. One day we were planning my graduation party, and the next day he was gone. That must have been devastating. It was. But it also taught me something important. Life is too short to waste on things that don't matter. My dad worked his whole life at a job he hated, saving money for retirement that he never got to enjoy. He was going to travel, learn to paint, spend time with his grandchildren someday. Except someday never came. Rachel met James's eyes across the small table. So I decided I would never do that. I would find work that mattered. I would appreciate small things like good coffee and homemade scones. I would remember people's birthdays and tell them they were important. Because none of us know how much time we have. Dreams deferred. What did you want to be? Rachel asked suddenly. Before you built the company. What was your dream? James looked startled by the question, as if no one had ever asked him before. I wanted to be a teacher. High school history. I loved the idea of helping young people understand how the past shapes the present, how decisions echo through time. What changed your mind? My father. He said teaching was what people did when they couldn't succeed in the real world. He said I had the Whitmore name to uphold, responsibilities to fulfill. So I went to business school, learned to read financial statements, and buried that dream so deep I almost forgot it existed. James ran his hand through his hair, a gesture Rachel was beginning to recognize as a sign of internal struggle. But lately, I've been wondering. What would have happened if I had been brave enough to follow my instincts? Would I be happier? Would I feel like my life actually meant something? It's not too late, Rachel said quietly. People change careers all the time. A 42-year-old CEO becoming a teacher would definitely make headlines, but would that be so terrible? You really believe that? That meaning matters more than money? I believe that money without meaning is just expensive emptiness. And I think you believe that too, or you wouldn't be sitting in a coffee shop at 8 in the morning talking about the dreams you gave up. An invitation. The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle by the time they needed to leave for work. They walked together toward Whitmore Industries, maintaining a professional distance on the sidewalk, but Rachel was acutely aware of James beside her. The way he positioned himself between her and the street traffic. How his long stride slowed to match her pace. The small gestures that suggested courtesy ran deeper than business etiquette. As they reached the building entrance, James turned to her. Rachel, I need to be honest with you about something. Okay. The meeting this afternoon. Yes, I want your input on the Riverside Initiative. Your perspective on community development is exactly what we need. But that's not the only reason I invited you. Rachel's heart began to beat faster. What's the other reason? Because I've been thinking about you since the moment I saw that lemon cake on my desk. Not just thinking. Wondering what it would be like to know someone who sees the world the way you do. Who remembers birthdays and believes in homemade food and thinks that buildings should make people happy. He paused, and Rachel could see him struggling with words that didn't come easily. I know this is complicated. I know there are 100 reasons why this, whatever this is, might not be appropriate. But I also know that for the first time in longer than I can remember, I feel like I'm waking up. Like I'm remembering how to be alive instead of just successful. Rachel felt her breath catch. Standing there in the morning light with rain-damp streets around them and the city waking up for another day, she made a decision. Would you like to have dinner with me? Not a business dinner. Just dinner. James's smile was radiant. I would love that. Tomorrow night? I know a small Italian place in the old neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but the food is incredible and it's quiet enough for real conversation. Perfect. As they entered the building together, neither of them noticed Patricia watching from the lobby windows, a knowing smile on her face. She had worked for James Whitmore for 12 years and had never seen him smile like that. Not once. The meeting. The afternoon executive meeting went better than Rachel had expected. She presented her ideas about the Riverside Initiative with passion and clarity, talking about community gardens as social infrastructure, about designing spaces that encouraged neighbors to actually know each other's names, about the difference between building developments and building communities. James listened with complete attention, his blue eyes focused on her face. When other executives questioned the financial viability of her suggestions, he backed her up, pointing out that communities with strong social connections had higher property values and lower crime rates in the long term. After the meeting, as people gathered their materials, James approached her chair. He was close enough that she could catch the subtle scent of his cologne, something clean and woodsy. That was impressive, he said quietly. You didn't just present ideas. You made people understand why those ideas matter. Thank you. I was nervous. You didn't show it. He paused, glancing around to make sure no one was close enough to overhear. I'm looking forward to tomorrow night. Me too. The first date. Saturday evening arrived with clear skies and a crisp breeze that smelled like winter approaching. Rachel stood in front of her closet, trying to decide between 3 different dresses before finally settling on a simple burgundy one with a flowing skirt. She wore her grandmother's pearl earrings and minimal makeup, wanting to look like herself rather than someone trying too hard. James picked her up at 7 in a dark sedan, not a limousine or anything ostentatious, just a nice car. He wore slacks and a button-down shirt with no tie, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms. His sandy brown hair was slightly tousled, and when he smiled at her, Rachel felt butterflies in her stomach. The restaurant he had chosen was called Angelo's, tucked into a narrow building between a bookstore and a bakery. Inside, the walls were covered with family photographs and old wine bottles. The smell of garlic and basil filled the air. An elderly man with a thick accent and twinkling eyes greeted them at the door. Mr. James. You finally bring someone to meet Angelo. This must be special lady. James actually blushed. Angelo, this is Rachel Morrison. Rachel, Angelo has been feeding me his grandmother's recipes since I first moved to this neighborhood 20 years ago. Over dinner, they talked about everything and nothing. Rachel learned that James played guitar but hadn't picked up the instrument in 3 years. That he donated anonymously to literacy programs because his mother had been a librarian. That he woke up every morning at 5 and went for a run, trying to outpace thoughts that kept him awake at night. James discovered that Rachel called her mother every Sunday morning without fail. That she had moved to the city from a small town in Vermont, leaving behind the community she loved to try to build communities for others. That she believed the best moments in life happened when you weren't trying to control every outcome. Tell me about your family, James said, twirling pasta around his fork with surprising grace. My mom is a school librarian. She's worked at the same elementary school for 26 years. She knows every child's reading level, which families are struggling, who needs extra help. She taught me that paying attention to people isn't just kindness. It's a responsibility. Is that where you learned to notice forgotten birthdays? Rachel smiled. Maybe. Or maybe I just recognize loneliness when I see it. James set down his fork, his blue eyes serious. Is that what you saw in me? Loneliness? I saw someone who had everything but seemed to take no joy in any of it. Someone who moved through his days checking off accomplishments rather than actually living them. The honesty might have sounded harsh, but Rachel's tone was gentle, understanding. James felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen. "You weren't wrong," he said quietly. "I've spent so many years building walls, creating distance, protecting myself from disappointment that I forgot what I was protecting myself for." The walk home. After dinner, they walked through the city streets, neither of them ready for the evening to end. The November air was cold but not uncomfortable. James offered Rachel his jacket, and she accepted, wrapping herself in fabric that smelled like him. They talked about small things. Favorite books, worst jobs they had ever had, places they wanted to travel. James admitted he had never been anywhere just for pleasure, only for business conferences. Rachel confessed she had never left the country but dreamed of seeing the northern lights in Iceland someday. "Why Iceland?" James asked. "Because the northern lights remind you that there's magic in the world. That not everything can be explained or controlled or put into spreadsheets. Sometimes you just have to stand in the dark and watch the sky dance." They ended up in Riverside Park, sitting on a bench overlooking the water. City lights reflected on the surface like fallen stars. "Rachel," James said, his voice rough with emotion he wasn't quite ready to name. "I need to tell you something. I'm listening. I haven't felt this alive in years. Maybe ever. Sitting in coffee shops talking about dreams I gave up. Walking through the city at night discussing northern lights. Eating dinner with someone who sees me as a person rather than a position or a paycheck." He turned to face her fully. "I don't know how to do this. Relationships, feelings, letting someone get close. I'm probably going to mess it up. But I want to try. With you." Rachel reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "Then we'll figure it out together. We'll mess it up together and fix it together and build something real together." James leaned closer, his forehead touching hers, sharing breath in the cold night air. "Can I kiss you? I was hoping you would." When their lips met, it was gentle at first, tentative, a question rather than a demand. But as Rachel responded, her free hand reaching up to cup his face, the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home and beginning an adventure all at once. When they finally separated, both slightly breathless, James smiled. A real smile that reached his eyes and made him look years younger. "Well," Rachel said, "that was definitely worth the wait." James laughed, the sound rich and genuine. "I'm thinking every moment with you is worth the wait." They sat together on the park bench, hands intertwined, watching the water and the lights and feeling like the universe had just shifted into better alignment. Neither of them knew what would come next, what complications or challenges they would face. But in that moment, wrapped in the possibility of new love and genuine connection, the future felt bright enough to chase away any darkness. Monday morning rumors. Rachel walked into Whitmore Industries on Monday morning feeling like she was floating. The weekend had been perfect. Coffee shops and Italian restaurants and kisses in the park. But as she stepped off the elevator at her floor, she immediately sensed something different in the air. Conversation stopped when she walked by. Colleagues who usually smiled at her looked away quickly. Nina rushed over before Rachel even reached her desk, her expression anxious. "We need to talk. Now." They went to the small break room, closing the door behind them. Nina crossed her arms, looking worried and protective at the same time. "There are rumors, Rachel. About you and Mr. Whitmore." Rachel's stomach dropped. "What kind of rumors?" "That you two were seen together over the weekend. At Angelo's restaurant, holding hands and looking very cozy. Someone from accounting was there with her husband and recognized you both. We were having dinner. We're both adults." "Rachel, he's the CEO. You're a coordinator. People are going to talk. They're already saying you baked him that cake to get ahead, that he's promoting you because you're dating him, that none of this is professional." Rachel felt anger rise in her chest, but also fear. She had known this would be complicated, but hearing it laid out so bluntly made it real. What people think doesn't change the truth. James and I care about each other. That's genuine, not calculated. Nina's expression softened. I believe you, honey. I see how you light up when you talk about him. But not everyone is going to be that generous. You need to be prepared for this to get messy. The summons. At 10 o'clock, Rachel received an email from Patricia asking her to come to the executive floor immediately. Her hands shook slightly as she rode the elevator up, wondering what awaited her. James stood at his office windows, his back to her when she entered. His shoulders were tense, and even from across the room, she could feel frustration radiating from him. Close the door, he said without turning around. Rachel did as he asked, then waited. The silence stretched between them like a physical thing. Someone saw us, James said finally, turning to face her. His blue eyes were stormy. At Angelo's. By this morning, the rumors had reached 3 department heads and a board member named Douglas Hammond. Nina told me. People are talking. It's worse than talking, Rachel. Douglas called me an hour ago to discuss the optics of my personal relationships and how they might affect investor confidence. James moved closer, running his hand through his hair in that gesture she had learned meant internal struggle. He spent 45 minutes lecturing me about corporate responsibility and appropriate boundaries. A man who's been married 5 times, twice to employees, had the audacity to tell me I was being unprofessional. What did you say to him? I told him my personal life was none of his concern. That I wasn't breaking any company policies. That as long as I fulfilled my duties as CEO, who I had dinner with was my own business. Rachel felt a surge of affection for him, standing up to board members on her behalf. But she also understood the implications. This is going to make things difficult, isn't it? It already is. James pulled a folder from his desk. But I've been thinking about this all weekend, even before Douglas called. I want to offer you a position. The proposal. Rachel's heart began to race as James opened the folder, revealing organizational charts and project proposals. I want to create a new department. Community Development and Integration. A division focused exclusively on building projects that actually serve the people who live in them. Affordable housing mixed with community spaces. Developments designed to strengthen neighborhoods rather than displace them. Projects that prioritize social good alongside financial returns. He looked at her intently. And I want you to lead it. Director of Community Development. You would have a team, a budget, and the authority to ensure every Whitmore Industries project incorporates genuine community benefits. Rachel stared at him, overwhelmed. James, this is everything I've ever wanted professionally. But you know what people are going to say. That you're promoting me because we're together. That this isn't real, just favoritism disguised as business. I know what they'll say. But here's the truth, Rachel. You're the most qualified person I know for this position. Your vision for community development is exactly what this company needs. What I need. You understand something about human connection that I've spent 15 years trying to quantify in spreadsheets. He paused, moving closer. But yes, it also gives us a legitimate professional reason to work together. To attend meetings, to travel to project sites, to spend time together without constant scrutiny. It brings our relationship into the light instead of hiding it in shadows. Rachel felt tears prick her eyes. You're willing to restructure your company for me? I'm willing to restructure my life for you. The question is whether you're willing to take the risk. Conditions and commitments. Rachel looked at the organizational charts, at the budget proposals, at the vision James had laid out for a different kind of development company. Then she looked at him, this man who had learned to see coffee shops as gathering spaces and farmers' markets as social infrastructure. I have conditions, she said firmly. James's expression was cautious but hopeful. Tell me. First, this position has to be real. I won't be a figurehead. If I'm going to do this, I need actual authority to make decisions that matter, even when they're expensive or complicated. Agreed. Second, our personal relationship cannot influence professional decisions. If we disagree about a project, you have to respect my expertise rather than defer to me because we're dating. Done. And third, you have to promise me you're doing this because you truly believe in creating something better, not just to solve a public relations problem. James took her hands in his, holding them gently. Rachel, 3 weeks ago I was a man who measured success exclusively in quarterly earnings. Then you reminded me that November 15th was my birthday, and everything changed. You gave me back the part of myself that remembers why I wanted to build beautiful spaces in the first place. His blue eyes were intense, sincere. I'm not restructuring the company for you. I'm restructuring it because you showed me what it could be, what I could be. And yes, I want to do it with you beside me, professionally and personally. But the vision itself, that's something you inspired that I can't ignore anymore. Rachel felt her resistance melt away. Okay. Yes. I'll take the position and the risk, and you, James Whitmore, with all the complications that come with loving someone the whole world is watching. The opposition. 3 weeks later, Rachel sat in her new office on the 14th floor, reviewing proposals for the Riverside Initiative, the first major project under her leadership. Floor-to-ceiling windows gave her views of the city. Architectural sketches and community planning diagrams covered her walls. She had a team of 6 people, a substantial budget, and the authority to make real change. But success had brought new challenges. Her assistant, Kevin, knocked on her door, his expression worried. We have a problem. The Riverside Community Board met last night. There's organized opposition to our plans. Rachel set down her coffee. What kind of opposition? A housing advocacy group led by someone named Denise Parker. She's telling residents that our community integration promises are just gentrification with better marketing. They've hired a lawyer and they're demanding a public hearing. Kevin handed her a thick folder of documents. Denise Parker has successfully blocked 3 major developments in the past 4 years. She has credibility and she's convinced the community that we're going to displace them despite our promises. Rachel opened the folder, finding newspaper articles and legal filings about Denise Parker. A 38-year-old attorney who had dedicated her career to protecting low-income residents from corporate development. Her track record was impressive and her skepticism was completely justified. She's not wrong to be suspicious, Rachel said quietly. Most developers do exactly what she's accusing us of doing. They promise community benefits and deliver displacement. But we're different, right? Our plans genuinely prioritize community needs. Rachel looked at Kevin, seeing doubt in his young face that mirrored her own internal questions. Are we different, Kevin? Or are we just better at packaging the same old approach with prettier words? The emergency meeting. An hour later, Rachel sat in James's conference room with department heads and Douglas Hammond, the board member who had initially opposed her relationship with James. Douglas was a man in his early 60s with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that made people listen when he spoke. The situation with Riverside is becoming a liability, Douglas began without preamble. Denise Parker has media connections and her opposition is attracting press attention. He slid a tablet across the table showing a local news website. The headline read, Community Advocates Challenge Whitmore Industries Gentrification with Gardens Approach. Rachel read the article quickly, her heart sinking as she saw her own quotes about community integration presented alongside Denise Parker's accusations of corporate manipulation. This is exactly what I warned about when James announced this new direction, Douglas continued, looking pointedly between Rachel and James. Emotional decision-making leads to exactly these kinds of complications. Rachel felt heat rise in her face. Mr. Hammond, with respect, this opposition isn't about emotional decision-making. It's about the fact that Denise Parker has every legitimate reason not to trust corporate developers. Most community promises are broken the moment construction is complete. Are you suggesting our promises aren't genuine? I'm suggesting that promises aren't enough. We need to provide guarantees, legal protections, ongoing community oversight that actually has teeth. We need to prove we're different instead of just claiming we are. James leaned forward. What are you proposing, Rachel? The bold move. Rachel took a deep breath, knowing what she was about to suggest would either prove James's faith in her or destroy everything they had built. I want to meet with Denise Parker. Not as adversaries, but as partners. I want to invite her into our planning process to help us design community protections that actually work. The room fell silent. Douglas looked incredulous. The architects exchanged worried glances. You want to invite our opposition into our planning meetings? Douglas said slowly. You want to hand her the tools to destroy this project? Rachel stood up, moving to the whiteboard. Mr. Hammond, I understand your concern about financial implications. But what you're calling naive idealism is actually the only sustainable business model for community development. She began sketching as she spoke, creating diagrams that showed two different approaches to development. Projects that ignore community needs fail in the long term. They create legal challenges, neighborhood opposition, and reputational damage that costs far more than upfront community investment. But projects that genuinely serve community needs become models that other neighborhoods want to replicate. They generate positive press, political support, and long-term financial stability through community partnership. Rachel drew detailed comparisons showing cost-benefit analyses, timeline projections, and risk assessments. Denise Parker's opposition isn't a threat. It's an opportunity to prove we mean what we say about putting community needs first. Douglas studied her diagram skeptically. And if Denise Parker's conditions make the project financially unviable? Then we learn that our community integration model needs refinement before we scale it to other projects. Better to discover that now with one project than after we've built 20 developments that displace the people we claim to serve. James watched Rachel present her case with a mixture of pride and concern. He could see the passion and intelligence that had first attracted him to her. But he also understood the magnitude of what she was proposing. I support Rachel's recommendation, James said quietly. She has more expertise in community development than anyone in this room. If she believes collaboration with Denise Parker is the right approach, then we move forward with that strategy. Douglas gathered his papers, his expression grim. I hope you're both prepared for the consequences if this fails. The board will not be forgiving if Riverside becomes a financial disaster. The public hearing. 2 weeks later, the Riverside Community Center was packed beyond capacity. Every folding chair was occupied. People stood along walls and spilled out into hallways. The November evening air was thick with tension and the smell of coffee and anxiety. Rachel had never spoken to a crowd this size, let alone one that viewed her with open suspicion. She sat at a long table facing the audience, with James beside her and 2 members of her team. Across from them, Denise Parker commanded attention effortlessly. A small woman with fierce intelligence in her dark eyes and quiet confidence that came from years of fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. The moderator, a city councilman named Rodriguez, called for attention. We're here to discuss Whitmore Industries' proposal for Riverside. Ms. Parker, you requested this hearing. Please present your concerns. Denise stood, her voice carrying clearly without microphone amplification. Thank you, Councilman. I want to be clear from the outset. We're not opposed to development. We're opposed to displacement disguised as development. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Rachel felt her heart racing as Denise continued. For 15 years, Whitmore Industries has built luxury developments throughout this city. Their track record includes 0 affordable housing units, 0 community ownership protections, and zero long-term commitments to existing residents. Denise's gaze moved to Rachel. Now they've hired a director of community integration, and suddenly they want us to believe they found their conscience. Furthermore, we have serious questions about the qualifications and motivations of the person Whitmore has chosen to lead this initiative. Ms. Morrison has no previous experience with large-scale community development, no background in housing policy, and her appointment coincided suspiciously with rumors about her personal relationship with Mr. Whitmore. Rachel felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Behind Denise's words, she heard the pain of communities that had been promised partnership and given gentrification instead. Before she could respond, an elderly man in the third row stood up. His voice was gravelly but strong. "I don't care about rumors or relationships. I care about whether my grandchildren will be able to afford to live in the neighborhood where I raised their mother." The room erupted in mixed reactions. Councilman Rodriguez called for order, then nodded to Rachel. "Ms. Morrison, would you like to respond?" The honest answer. Rachel stood slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she looked out at the sea of skeptical faces. She could deflect, she could defend, she could hide behind corporate language. Or she could do what had brought her to this moment in the first place. She could tell the truth. "Ms. Parker is right," Rachel said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I don't have extensive experience in large-scale community development. Whitmore Industries' track record speaks for itself. And yes, I am personally involved with James Whitmore." A buzz of surprised murmurs filled the room. James looked at her with something between admiration and panic as Rachel continued. "But I want to tell you why I'm here anyway, and why I believe this project can be different." Rachel moved away from the table, walking closer to the audience. "6 months ago, I was working on small projects, designing parks that looked beautiful on paper but often failed to serve the people who needed them most. I was frustrated because I knew good design could strengthen communities, but I also knew that without genuine community input and protection, even the best intentions become tools for displacement." She paused, looking directly at Denise Parker. "When Mr. Whitmore offered me this position, I almost turned it down. I knew that taking it would mean people would question my motives, my qualifications, my integrity. But I also knew that if I didn't take it, nothing would change. Whitmore would continue building luxury developments, and communities like Riverside would continue to be seen as obstacles rather than partners." Rachel pulled out her phone, projecting an image onto the screen behind her. Not the polished corporate presentation, but hand-drawn sketches she had worked on late into the previous night. "This is our current proposal. But I want to show you what I think it should be instead. The revolution." She replaced the image with detailed diagrams that showed revolutionary community protections. Community land trust ownership for 40% of housing units, ensuring permanent affordability. Local hiring requirements with guaranteed training programs for construction and maintenance jobs. Community Oversight Board with real veto power over design changes. Revenue sharing from commercial spaces going directly into a neighborhood improvement fund controlled by residents. The room grew quieter as Rachel continued describing protections that went far beyond standard community benefits packages. "But most importantly," Rachel said, looking directly at the elderly man who had spoken earlier, "a legally binding commitment that no current resident will be displaced due to rent increases or property tax changes resulting from this development. Ever." Denise Parker leaned forward, her expression skeptical but interested. "Those are impressive promises, Ms. Morrison. But how do we know Whitmore Industries will honor them when the lawyers and accountants start looking for loopholes?" "Because we're not just making promises," James said, standing up to join Rachel. "We're offering to create a legal framework where Denise Parker and her organization have enforcement power. Where the Community Oversight Board has the authority to halt construction if we violate any commitment. Where residents have legal recourse if we fail to deliver what we promise." He looked out at the crowd. "I've built a successful company by prioritizing profit over people. Rachel taught me that real success means building something that actually serves communities rather than displacing them. If we can't prove that with Riverside, then we don't deserve to build anything anywhere. The room was completely silent now. Rachel could see people exchanging glances, whispering to each other, reconsidering their opposition. Denise Parker studied them both for a long moment. "I'll need to see everything in writing. Every protection, every guarantee, every enforcement mechanism. And I'll need independent lawyers to review every document." "Agreed," Rachel said immediately. "In fact, I'd like you to join our planning committee. Help us design protections that actually work instead of just ones that sound good in presentations." Denise's eyebrows rose. "You want me on your planning committee?" "I want the expertise of someone who knows how to protect vulnerable communities from corporate development. If we're serious about doing this right, we need people like you making sure we don't cut corners or break promises." For the first time since the hearing began, Denise Parker smiled. A small smile, cautious but genuine. "Ms. Morrison, if you're willing to put your money where your mouth is, then I'm willing to give you a chance to prove these aren't just pretty words." The beginning. 3 hours later, after detailed discussions and dozens of questions from community members, the hearing ended with cautious optimism rather than outright opposition. Denise Parker had agreed to join the planning committee. The Community Oversight Board would be established with real enforcement power. Whitmore Industries had committed to protections that no other developer had ever offered. As people filed out of the community center, Rachel and James stood together in the now empty room. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, but also exhilarated. "You took a huge risk tonight," James said quietly. "Admitting our relationship in front of everyone, offering Denise Parker real power over the project, promising protections that could make this financially challenging." "We took a huge risk," Rachel corrected. "You stood up there with me. You backed every promise I made." James reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Because I believe in what we're building. Not just the Riverside project, but this partnership. The idea that love and integrity and community can coexist with business success." Rachel leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. "Do you think it will work? Can we actually pull this off? I think that 3 months ago, I was a man who ate alone in corner offices and measured success exclusively in quarterly earnings. Now I'm standing in a community center at 10 at night, having just promised to revolutionize how my company does development, all because a woman baked me a birthday cake and reminded me that everyone deserves to be remembered." He turned to face her fully, cupping her face gently in his hands. "If we can make that transformation, we can make anything work." When they kissed, there in the empty community center with folding chairs stacked against walls and the smell of coffee still lingering in the air, it felt like sealing a promise. Not just to each other, but to everyone who had trusted them enough to give them a chance. Outside, the November night was cold and clear. Stars were visible despite the city lights, tiny points of brightness in the vast darkness. Rachel and James walked to his car hand in hand, both of them understanding that they had just crossed a threshold they couldn't uncross. The road ahead would be complicated. There would be financial challenges, board meetings where Douglas Hammond questioned every decision, community members who remained skeptical despite tonight's promises. Building something real was always harder than building something that just looked impressive. But they had each other. They had a vision worth fighting for. And they had learned that the most important things in life couldn't be bought or negotiated or controlled. They could only be built together, one honest conversation, one kept promise, one remembered birthday at a time. 3 months ago, James Whitmore had been the CEO nobody remembered on his birthday. Now he was a man in love, leading a company transformation, and learning that the sweetest success came not from quarterly profits, but from building something that actually mattered. And Rachel Morrison, who had once believed a simple act of kindness might brighten one person's day, had discovered that sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest revolutions. The ending wasn't really an ending at all. It was a beginning.